Hello and welcome to the RotoWire WNBA show, where we talk about fantasy basketball. Today, broadcasting from RotoWire's headquarters in Madison. I'm Jason Shebilske alongside Kirien Sprecher. We are back. Today, we'll discuss this weekend's action from around the WNBA. We'll also outline some of the top players to add heading into the third week of the fantasy season. And finally, we'll break down the week of action ahead. Those looking to subscribe to RotoWire can use the promo code YouTube15 at checkout for 15% off any RotoWire subscription. RotoWire has plenty of useful tools available now that the WNBA season is underway, including stats, DFS advice, and betting picks. It's also getting to be fantasy football draft season, so that can be very helpful for that. It's a great resource to keep up with the WNBA and just fantasy sports in general, and the promo code YouTube15 will get you the best deal. During today's show, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments and we'll get them answered. If you ask live, we'll get them answered on the show, but we'll also be active in the comments afterward to provide any additional insight. It was a busy weekend around the WNBA, including a pair of decisive wins by the Liberty and a massive comeback win by the Dream on Friday. Kirien, what stood out to you most about the weekend?
I think we just have to start with Odyssey Sims' offensive explosion last night. It was her first 30-point game since she was a rookie in 2014. She was 9 for 10 from the free throw line, 10 for 14 from the field. I was really high on Sims as a sleeper candidate before the season started, just given the Sparks' rotation. She started out slow, and after a few games, I was like, she's a good streaming candidate. You don't need to roster her, but when the Sparks are playing, she's a good option to use. But I didn't see this coming. This production was absolutely incredible. And obviously, like, Sunday's game was crazy. The performance was crazy. Sparks still didn't pull out the W. But she's been great over her last 5 games, averaging 15 points, 3 assists, and 3 rebounds. It's worth noting that the Sparks made a lineup change last night. They had Julia Elmond start over Sarah Ashley Barker, who had been previously starting for Ricky Jackson. We'll have more info on Julie later. Obviously, she's going to be playing in Eurobasket, so that takes another player out of this rotation. Ricky Jackson and Cameron Brink should be back soon, right? Brink was sometime in June, so maybe not soon, maybe a couple weeks from now. Still, Jackson's coming back from a concussion, so those 2 players will take some usage away from Sims long term. I think Sims is still a long-term ad right now. You score 32 points, like you deserve a roster spot for at least a week. But the Sparks only play 1 game this week, so that's a big factor when trying to decide who to pick up long term. But then, like we said, Julie is going to be joining Belgium for Eurobasket, so that, like I said, takes another player out of the rotation. I think Sims is going to be a key player here for the next couple of weeks, and we can probably trust her in fantasy.
Yeah, and even though Julie Allemon started, she really didn't have much production at all. The thing that encourages me about Odyssey Sims, and we'll talk more in depth about her during our waiver pickups later, but with Sims, even though she's had an increased role while Jackson has been sidelined, she's had a starting role all season. So I think that there's a chance that once Cameron Brink is back and they have their team basically at full health, that they try and alter their rotation slightly. But I definitely think that Sims at least warrants a season-long roster spot in deeper leagues. And then if you're in a shallow league, she might be a little bit more in streaming consideration until Ricky Jackson and Cameron Brink are back. But as we've seen a lot around the WNBA, both this season and in previous seasons, a lot can change from week to week. So having Odyssey Sims on your roster, she's proven to be capable of handling a big role when she has enough minutes. So I think that she'll be someone who can really contribute down the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when, Jackson and Brink are healthy, the starting lineup would be Sims, Plum, Jackson, Stevens, and Brink. I think that's probably a pretty fair assumption to make. And so, yeah, in that case, obviously Sims would have more production. You think about that front court, there's going to be a lot of attention on that front court. So Plum and Sims should be able to benefit when they're at full strength.
For sure. I was also really impressed by how much the Valkyries stuck around against Minnesota on Sunday. Golden State led the game at halftime, and if it wasn't for poor third quarter by the Valkyries, they would have been in the mix to hand the Lynx their first loss of the season, even with Nafisa Collier back in action for Minnesota. Golden State has definitely been inconsistent this season. They're 2-4, but I think that the team will at least be in the mix to hit the over on their preseason win line of 9.5 wins.
Yeah, you absolutely nailed that preseason prediction, I believe. And you say Golden State's been inconsistent in the win-loss column, sure, but every night they are consistently playing tough and rugged and making it. You come in, you're Minnesota, you're Indiana, you're the Liberty. You come in, you're playing Golden State. You're like, all right, expansion team, let's take care of business. They're making these teams work for it every night, and like we've always said, there's really no easy games in the W. Sure, maybe some team has an off night or something, but Golden State, even if they have poor shooting nights, they are going to play tough and they're going to run a lot of bodies at you. And I don't think this is going to be the first time or the last time, where we're talking about Golden State pushing one of the top tier teams the full distance.
Right. During the offseason, I think they zigged when a lot of people thought that they would zag with the expansion draft and the regular draft, where Golden State focused a lot on international players. And while the available players in the expansion draft wasn't made public, I think that they probably had some veteran talent around the WNBA available to them. But just the fact that that the Valkyries are doing this with a lot of players who don't have experience in the WNBA, so they'll only get better from here in years to come. I think for this year specifically, they might go through a little bit of a cold stretch in late June because a lot of their players will be participating in Eurobasket. I think off the top of my head, Janelle Salaun and Julie Van Loo have been confirmed, but I would assume that a few others might also join the fold. So they could be shorthanded, but maybe they'll add a few players on hardship contracts who will be able to show out for them, and they'll just have a deep crop of players for down the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed there. I'm going switching lanes here. Ariel Atkins was fantastic. Maybe weekend plus, going back a couple games. This might be cheating because we were like all expecting it. Her to be a big part of Chicago's offense to start the season, but that just wasn't the case. The most shots she took in the first 3 games was 8. And then since then, she's averaged 21 points in 31 minutes, and she's taken at least 14 shots in each contest. This guy in 2-1 during this stretch, 2 wins against Dallas, and the other game was against the Mercury. So, maybe not the best test, but watching Atkins, take over and be a big part of this offense is going to be huge for the Sky in the long run. Atkins has averaged double-digit points in each of her first 7 seasons with Washington. Now it took a couple of games and she's finding her groove in Chicago. That is a huge storyline. Obviously talked about Angel Reese and Camila Cardoso a lot. Atkins needs to be a go-to scorer for this team to open up that paint a lot.
Yeah, and the fact that Atkins has been able to do that, to do what she's done, even with Courtney Vandersloot handling a bigger role than she had in New York, has been really encouraging. I think that from a long-term standpoint, a lot of people will look at the trade that happened during the offseason that wound up being basically Ariel Atkins for Sonia Citron and be like, well, I think that Chicago would probably rather have Citron in the long run. But when it comes to this season, especially for fantasy purposes, Ariel Atkins has been a star, and I think that will certainly continue as the season progresses.
For sure. I'm just gonna throw up a comment from Nacho's Gone. I know you were a big follower during the NBA season too. Appreciate you, Nacho's Gone. Burton, 21 points last night, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. Second 20-point game this season. She does have 2 2-point outings this season though. One of those was in the season opener. But yeah, the thing with me, Nacho's Gone, about the Valkyries, and I'm sure Jason can attest to this too. But it's just any given night, the Valkyries could play someone 30 minutes or 15 minutes. Burton is one of the rare exceptions to that rule. With Tiffany Hayes in and out of the lineup dealing with this nose injury, Burton has played 29 minutes in 4 straight games before playing only 24 last night. She scored 21 in 24 minutes. So like that's a pretty good offensive explosion. I think Burton is a very must roster player right now. Like we said, there's going to be players from the Valkyries that emerged as must roster, and right now it's Veronica Burton and Janelle Salaun for me. Temi Fagman, like Kayla Thornton are probably pretty close to that tier list too. But it's any given game, the rotation changes for the Valkyries. So you just got to keep a close eye on it.
Yeah, the Valkyries have certainly been outperforming expectations, and you mentioned her, but in addition to Veronica Burton, a player who has been key has been Janelle Salaun. She missed the Valkyries opening night game, but she's started in each of her first 5 WNBA appearances. She's had consistent playing time with double-digit field goal attempts in all 5 outings. We were off last week, so we didn't really have a chance to mention her as a streaming candidate. But I think that at this point, she's moved into the category of season-long players to add at this point. The one wrinkle for her is that it seems likely that she'll compete in Eurobasket, so she'll be away from the Valkyries for a few weeks in late June. But if you have an open IR spot, she's a player who could certainly be stashed there. If you do wind up keeping her on your bench, I think that she's someone who, once she's back in action, she'll be able to really contribute for you.
Yeah, watching Salaun this weekend, if you follow the show, Hannah says my favorite talk about that all the time. So much fun to watch. She had a big explosion last week too against the Valkyries. But Salaun, she looks like she has KD's mentality. She's like, I'm taller and better than everyone else on this court. You give me the ball and I'm gonna go get you a bucket. That's super fun to watch. I think you watch this Valkyries team play. We just talked about Veronica Burton, Tiffany Hayes, Thornton, Fagmanley, all solid players. And like you said, we weren't really sure what happened or which players were available in the expansion draft or anything like that. But it's a lot of like, if they were on other rosters, they would be 5th or 6th or 7th players in the rotation, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But Salaun is clearly the most talented player on this roster to me. And she's young. And so, I think she's a must roster right now. If you have an IR spot available, yes, use her. That's a no-brainer. But it could be tough, that once injuries start piling up. Would you rather keep Kalea Copper or Janelle Salaun on your IR spot? When you start getting into those conversations, it gets a little bit difficult. But if you have a spot available, yes, Salaun is a must roster. Even when she goes to Eurobasket, just keep her on the IR. She is a very, very talented player. And, if it doesn't happen this year, it's going to happen where she explodes and becomes, a perennial 15, 18 point per game scorer.
Absolutely.
The big thing with like roster pickups, if you want to stream a spot, if you want to, if you want a season long pickup, if you want a week long pickup, you just have to find out which one of those that you want right now, right? So like Salaun is a season long ad for me. There's a lot of ads that I would add for tomorrow's game slates. If you're going to add a player for the next, week, you got to look at the Phoenix Mercury and the Washington Mystics, because those are the only 2 teams that are playing 3 games this week. Then you got a handful of teams that play 5 games, and then you got 5 teams that play 1 game. So having a player that plays 3 games, even if it's not a top tier option on one of those teams, it's going to go a long way in helping you win this week. And one of those players is Kathryn Westbeld, plays for the Mercury. She has 3 games this week. She's been starting because, Alyssa Thomas has missed some games. Kalea Copper has missed some games. Natasha Mack is out. Natasha Mack and Kalea Copper aren't expected to be back this week. Alyssa Thomas, maybe, but a calf injury. She's already missed 2 games. Maybe she plays in one of the 3 games. Either way, if Thomas comes back, Westbeld should remain in the starting lineup. And it's not like Westbeld has been a prolific producer by any means, but she gets you 15 fantasy points. And in 3 weeks, or 3 games this week, that's 45, 50 fantasy points. That's a lot more than, if you had Jonquel Jones for the Liberty, 1 game. She would have to have a 2020 game to make you want to start Jonquel Jones over Kathryn Westbeld in this situation. I'm not saying drop Jonquel Jones or anything. I'm just saying Kathryn Westbeld can provide you a lot of production this week. And I think if you're going to look for if you're the type of player who's not looking every day and they're just like, it's Monday, I want to make my waiver pickup, and then I want to set my lineup for the rest of the week, Kathryn Westbeld is a great candidate for that.
Right. And the thing with Westbeld is that she now has multiple avenues for increased playing time. I think that to start the season, it was the case where Natasha Mack being out was what had been leading to Kathryn Westbeld having an increased role. But with Alyssa Thomas now out as well, in addition to Kalia Copper, I think that there are just so many ways that that Westbeld can really step up, and that she should have continued opportunities to step up in the coming weeks as well. And with Westbeld, especially.
You're cutting out a little bit, so let me just interrupt real quick.
Sure.
Nacho's gone. Yeah, Clark and Brink's injuries are absolutely, like, that's what we're talking about with the multiple IR spots. Nachos, are you hearing any technical difficulties on your end? If you could give us a yes or no, that would be helpful so we can get rolling with the rest of the show. I think you got to keep Clark and Brink on your roster. I don't think you want to drop either of them right now. If you can survive the next couple of weeks, I think you'll be happy that you kept both of those players on the roster. If you drop one of them, there's definitely a team in your league that doesn't have, or has an IR spot available that will pick one of them up, pick Brink up and put them on their IR spot immediately. So you don't want to lose everything there. Appreciate you answering, Nachos. Maybe it was just my headphones, but yeah, I would definitely hold on to Brink for now.
For sure. And so sticking with the Mercury for additions, Monique Akoa-Makani has also performed much better than expected. She's had at least 23 ESPN fantasy points in 4 of her last 5 appearances. I would label her slightly more as a streaming candidate than Kathryn Westbeld, but with an asterisk that her role could decrease significantly once Kalia Copper is back in action. Copper will probably miss at least a few more weeks, so Akoa-Makani certainly warrants consideration in fantasy formats for the foreseeable future, but she's just someone to keep in mind that, like, down the stretch, she might be someone to move off of down as the season progresses.
Yeah, for sure. My next pick is Lexie Hull. Like I said, with Caitlin Clark's out, Hull has moved in the starting lineup, averaging 12 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, and 1.3 steals in 30 minutes. Sydney Colson returned to practice today, but Sophie Cunningham still doesn't sound like she's close to returning. So Hull should have an increased role this week. Fever have 2 games, so obviously that's still twice as many as the Liberty. That's a big difference when we're talking about those sort of things. So Hull isn't, a go-to player for the Fever, but she plays a lot of minutes. She does a little bit of everything. I like this play for this week. The Fever haven't been great without Caitlin Clark, and they really need to take a step forward. And I think, with all of these injuries, Hull is going to be a player that maybe gets a little bit of a bump in production, but even if she continues to do what she was doing, she's going to provide you a lot of production in this week where there's just not very many WNBA games. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, and with Hull versus like a player like Sydney Colson took on a starting role when Caitlin Clark went down, but Colson really didn't do much. Whereas Lexie Hull, for fantasy purposes, I would say is definitely the player that you want coming out of that Fever backcourt right now. Ginger Jones says that she put Tip Hayes in IR and added Monique Akoa-Makani since Westbeld was taken, and she kept Caitlin Clark. I think adding Akoa-Makani and having Tiffany Hayes on IR is a great move. And really, any of those players for the Mercury who are stepping up right now are like good options to have for fantasy right now. Thanks for chiming in.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we said with the games played, the Sparks only have 1 game this week. So like Sims is a season-long ad for me. So I'm fine adding her. But don't come at us next Monday and be like, I added Odyssey Sims and I didn't win this week. Well, she only has 1 game, so she might not be the best streaming candidate this week. But she still is trending in the right direction. My last pickup, this is just a process of elimination, and I'm going to throw a bunch of names at you. Washington plays 3 times. Aaliyah Edwards is rostered in 60% of leagues. Stephanie Dolson is rostered in 55. Jade Melbourne 31. Shakira Austin 31. I have my issues with each one of these players. Why I wouldn't want to hold them or don't think that they're like the greatest player. Aaliyah Edwards, I think she will be in the starting lineup here eventually. Kiki Irfan's playing really well. Edwards is on a minutes limit. Stephanie Dolson, her minutes can fluctuate. Jay Melbourne and Shakira Austin, their production can fluctuate. But this is a week where they have 3 times as many games as a lot of teams in the league. So these players can easily provide you strong production. Stephanie Dolson can easily outscore Jonquel Jones this week. Like these are the things that you need to find to win your league. So if you are in a tough matchup, you have a lot of these players that are on teams that are playing once this week, stream some of these Washington players, stream some of these Phoenix players. It's not an exact science, right? Who's going to pop on any given week, but just play the numbers game and take the players on these teams that play 3 games this week. Shakira Austin, we talked about her a lot, and we'll probably continue to talk about her. She's one of the more polarizing players in the league. When she's on the court, the production is unreal. Even if she's playing 15 minutes, she can outscore a lot of players. It's just the injuries, and it's already reared its head a couple times with a couple different injuries this year. So be on the lookout for any questionable takes for Shakira Austin in this busy week. But other than that, all systems go on these Washington Mystics.
Absolutely. And we've danced around Odyssey Sims a little bit, but just to officially stamp her on the waiver pickups for this week, she's a slightly risky pickup for this week, just for the fact that the Sparks do have just that one game. So with daily lineups, she might not get you as much production as usual, but she's had consistent minutes all season, and she's been much more reliable as a scorer, including a career high 32 points during Sunday's loss to the Mercury. I usually approach career high marks with caution, since it's by definition their ceiling at this point. We just had this conversation in the office earlier where for fantasy purposes, we usually tend to err on the side of examining past production instead of trying to predict too much about the future. But Sims has scored in double figures in 4 of her last 5 games, signaling that there might be some sustainable production there. It's worth noting that all of those scoring performances did occur when Jackson has been sidelined, but Jackson could miss a few more games due to her concussion. So Sims is at least an intriguing streaming candidate at this point, and she has some season-long upside because even when Jackson was on the court, Sims would generally have pretty consistent shot volume. So that can usually be a pretty good indicator of whether a player will be able to sustain their production throughout the season. And then we have an interesting week of games ahead, including multi-game slates on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, but no games scheduled for Wednesday or for Monday night as well. I feel as though the most intriguing games of the week itself before the weekend, for me, they both fall on Tuesday. The Mercury and Lynx should be a close matchup, especially if Alyssa Thomas is back in action. The Lynx took down Phoenix by 3 points on Friday, but that was when the Mercury were playing without Thomas. And I'm also interested to see whether the Fever can finally pick up their first win with Caitlin Clark against the Mystics. Washington took down Indiana last week, and the Fever lost again Friday against the Sun, despite entering the game as 12.5-point favorites. However, the Fever have now played multiple games without Clark, so the team has had some time to adjust. So I think that it's possible that they start to get things back on track during what could be Clark's final week out of action. But Sydney Colson and Sophie Cunningham are also dealing with injuries, so that could put a damper on the Fever's chances to compete as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We could go on for do a whole nother show about the WNBA scheduling issues, right? Why are there 3 games at 9 p.m. When there's 2 games at 6? We could space these out. We could talk all day about this, but this seems like a prime opportunity to have a big week in the WNBA. The NBA is off for a couple of days before one game and then no games on a day. why are we not capitalizing on this? Like, this is like, what are we going to do this week? But yeah, I'm looking at Indiana, Chicago this weekend. Chicago got blown out by Indiana in the opener, but has been playing better since behind Ariel Atkins, like I mentioned earlier. So this will be a good litmus test for Chicago. Were those 2 wins against Dallas a fluke? Are they ready to take this next step? Have they figured out their early season sluggish streak and they're ready to ready to go on a run? And like you said, Indiana's susceptible right now without Clark and with all of the injuries that they're dealing with. They've had a tough time and like few disappointing performances, and other than a DeWanna Bonner, just like, take it back 10 years sort of thing. Like they would be on a much worse stretch of games. So Indiana's susceptible, but they're also going to be playing really hard. They're not going to take Chicago lightly. Obviously we don't get the Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese headlining sort of deals, but I still don't think either of these teams like each other very much, even without those 2 players or like without those 2 going head to head. So I think this will be a really fun, really competitive game. And gotta wait till the weekend for it, but looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah, and it will be played at the United Center in Chicago instead of Wintrust Arena, which is where the Sky usually play their games. So the Sky, even though ticket prices have dropped a bit since Caitlin Clark was since Caitlin Clark's injury was announced, I think that that the energy in the United Center will really help to provide an extra spark for the Sky as well. And then just closing things out, Ginger Jones is asking what we think about the Fever picking up Ari McDonald on a hardship contract. She doesn't recall her fantasy points being very high in previous fantasy years. So with Ari McDonald, she last year she was kind of inconsistent, but she did have a lot of periods in which she would score like in the teens or in the 20s when she was with the Sparks last year. So especially if Caitlin Clark does wind up missing more than 2 weeks, I think that Ari McDonald is someone who could really wind up stepping up because like we've said, Sydney Colson hasn't done a lot. Lexie Hull and Sophie Cunningham have been a little bit more reliable, but they are so banged up right now where Caitlin Clark, her injury was announced that she would miss at least 2 weeks. And so I think that it's possible that she's reevaluated and maybe would have to miss a little bit of additional time. We obviously hope that that doesn't happen because Caitlin Clark is super fun to watch. But I think that Ari McDonald is a player that, especially if you're in an 8 to 10 team league, I think that she's worth a speculative add that she could potentially have an impact in the coming days for sure. Thanks so much for that question. And that does it for our Monday show. We will, now that the regular season has begun, we're moving down to once per week. So we'll be back next Monday at 1 p.m. Central. Be sure to join us then. Thanks for watching.